Hi, I'm Shona, and you're listening to the Practice Makes Perfect podcast.
A musical career must find its niche. Broadening their horizon, I think, to put it simply.
Welcome, everybody, back to another episode. Today, we are joined by Adam Heron. Welcome, Adam. How are you?
Very well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you for coming. It's wonderful to have you. So, first off, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am 22 years old. I study at the Royal Academy of Music. I study the piano. And I've been playing for just over a decade now, which of course feels probably a lot shorter than the truth. And of course, I do have an ambition of being a professional musician in whatever domain it ends up being. My career to date, I suppose, has been quite eclectic. I started off as a choir boy in the choir of Gloucester Cathedral and then moved on to Wells Cathedral School. From then, I won a scholarship to the Academy where I am today.
So, how did you get into music? Why piano?
Well, I was brought up in an Irish family. Through being brought up in an Irish family, one listens to music all the time. It's an essential part of the culture. Now, the piano, and more specifically classical music, was something that actually came to me much later. I started off with the violin and playing Irish folk music, jigs and reels, around the age of 6 or 7. But classical music really only started when I joined the choir. Why the piano? Well, the story is I went to the local primary school and they had this old Mickleborough piano, a local make of piano from Bristol. So they were giving it away, and so we signed up to have this thing. They gave it to us. We only had to pay for the delivery, which back then was about £50, a bargain by today's standards anyway. And so I had this new toy in the house, and that's the story of how I became so enamored with the piano and with classical music.
Wow. It's amazing how everyone has a different story of how they started their instrument. That's amazing. Why did you pick RAM to study at?
Well, I think students have to take into consideration a lot of things, especially finances. I mean, it's not something to be overlooked, but unfortunately at the moment, an undergraduate is looking at least £9,000 per year. I was very fortunate to have a scholarship offer from the Academy. Now, I didn't receive the same offer from the other places I applied to in the UK. So for me, it was simply a question of being able to fund my studies and have a good education somewhere that is sustainable. All the conservatoires in the country are great. There are valuable teachers, valuable courses, and I think that's the most important thing. It's a very exciting place. London is one of the great cultural capitals of Europe. It's a very difficult place to adapt to after having lived in the country, but one really profits from it. During the first year, for example, I think I was out to see a symphonic concert probably at least 2 to 3 times a week, which was absolutely fantastic for me, coming from the countryside. On the concert-giving side of things, of course, it's great for your career as a musician as well, being somewhere where there are lunchtime concert opportunities, evening concert opportunities, dare I say it, 24/7. It almost seems like there's some kind of music playing around the clock in London. So it's a great place for your career, your persona, and to learn other skills as well. I remember taking all sorts of different classes, languages and other life skills all around university.
Okay, so do you play any other instruments? Were they part of the classes you had?
Oh, I wouldn't say I play any other instruments. I started on the violin, but I think there's a reason why I don't play the violin anymore. I used to play the viola as well. I do take classes in historical performance. I learn basic harpsichord technique, and I conduct and compose as well.
What's it like being one of the few BAME musicians at RAM? What's that like?
In all honesty, I don't feel any different. It's a very welcoming place. It's a fantastic environment in which I don't feel like an outsider. My teacher's very supportive in that respect. There are lots of opportunities to diversify our institution. And so personally, and of course I cannot speak for everybody, it would be wrong for me to speak on behalf of anybody else, but for me, I'm fortunate to say that it has been smooth sailing.
Okay, so going on from that question, how do you think being a BAME musician has changed your musical career?
I think for anybody, a musical career must find its niche, because at the end of the day, if everybody's going to play the canonical composers, things would be rather stagnant, wonderful as the music is. So I think having the incentive to get to know different composers, perhaps of my ancestral background as well, composers like Barcarolle, for example, has been very beneficial, and there's been lots of support in that respect. Opportunities like Rebecca Amordia's African concert series in London, which promoted music by African composers, which was absolutely fantastic. I think it's really a case of expanding one's competences and really, as I say, again, once more broadening the horizon, getting to know new repertoire and new venues, and of course new contact in that respect. So it's a very diverse field.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. So, what are your future plans for piano?
Well, it's a very difficult thing to plan, I think, because it's such a volatile industry. I mean, playing the piano is not so much about turning up in a straitjacket and playing in a concert anymore. It's about being a social media expert. It's about being entrepreneurial. It's about forming connections at a personal level, relationships and friendships across borders. Because if you fail to do that, I think there are going to be very few job opportunities. Now, for me, the simple plan I have is just to keep growing. I don't mean physically. I mean growing my network, of course. And I think whether that's in this country or abroad on the other side of the Atlantic, making new contacts, further study, of course, somewhere, and I don't know where at the moment. Broadening the horizon, I think, to put it simply. Yeah. Broadening the horizon.
That's a very nice way of putting it very simply. I like that, broadening.
Rather vague, though, but I do hope that you see what I mean, because the industry, it's not simply about, at least as far as I'm concerned, saying that in 10 years I want to master such and such a concerto or whatever. Yeah. But for me, it really is vague, because things will come unexpectedly. I might receive, if I'm very lucky, a concert offer from someplace, or a job offer to teach at a certain institution, maybe in a different country. So my job now is to be prepared, learn languages, get prepared, and try to do as much as I can. And take things as they come.
I see what you mean when you say broadening the horizon, because it is vague, but if you think about it, when you started piano, there was not really a need to be online, to have this social media presence. Whereas now that you've come to the stage where you're going to carry on, make money from it, that is something which is very key. So let's discuss practice. Do you have a routine?
I do have a routine, and it's quite a simple routine. I usually practice in slots of 2 hours at a time, and funnily enough, I found that my best practice is in the morning. I usually try to do morning, afternoon, and evening, simple as. And between each session, of course, I will focus on different repertoire and different skills. For a certain session, it might be, usually I do note learning in the morning. I find in the morning, learning new repertoire when the brain is fresh, that's my strength. Afternoon and evening, I seem to be better doing it with studies. When I've warmed up a little bit, I seem more technically able. So that's my plan. I know for many people it'd be the other way around. Of course, I don't do any technical warm up in the morning, but that's to say that practicing etudes, I prefer to do that in the evening.
Yeah, okay. And you said you do that morning, afternoon, and evening, and you do slots of 2 hours. So would it be suffice to say you practice 6 hours?
Approximately 6 hours. I would say between 5 and 6.
Okay.
But of course, when people ask me how much time I practice, this changes. It's really more about the quality of the practice. I don't have a clock. I don't have a stopwatch there. I'm not militant in that respect. Probably, maybe I ought to be, but I don't.
Yeah, I think it changes for every person, and everyone has a different way of checking. Obviously, when you have other things to do, it's good to have an idea. But so, how do you work around university?
Well, I think the mistake, even in answering this question, I don't find that it is a case of working around university work. I feel it's a case of working wholeheartedly with university work. Now, academia and performance seem, for some reason, to be viewed as separate, almost dichotomous. And it's not the case. I really like to apply what I learn at university to what I do back, and that makes the practice better, it makes my performance better. So actually, after having learnt about a certain concept, for example, in the musicology class, the next practice session, I'll be able to apply what I've learned. Of course, many of these things take several months, but yes, it's a case of, I think, working together, in a sense, as one whole, putting every module into one whole, which I think music performance ought to be.
So, what are you playing at the moment?
Well, at the moment I am working at Schumann's Geistervariation, the Ghost Variations by Schumann, which are these variations are wonderful, so intimate, they're very vulnerable. So I'm looking at them at the moment. In addition to that, I love Bach, so I'm returning to the Sixth English Suite, and on top of that, Kinderzählen as well of Schumann. So it's a nice little mix, and of course some studies on the side.
Yeah. So we are in the middle of a pandemic. If you don't know that, please go check the news. But how did lockdown affect your practice? How did you change your practice? And what was one thing that you would like to keep from your lockdown practice going forward?
Well, lockdown, I'd say, has affected me profusely in a physical condition. And in fact, my practice has been negatively affected in that I had several injuries from the sudden restriction in what I was doing. I mean, in 2019, I had around 50 to 60 concerts. In 2020, next to none. And so, a rapid decline in my activity followed by a sudden incline in the summer. That did cause some physical strain, to say the least. What would I bring forward from lockdown? Well, in all honesty, I think it's actually regimes that are completely unrelated to practice. For example, in lockdown, I've had the opportunity just to get more physically active and to really understand what my body needs. And that's one. Now, the other thing, I think, is having enjoying this intellectual capacity that I've been able to give myself over lockdown. So I spent some time studying French and Arabic, and the listener's probably thinking, well, what does this have to do with music? Well, it's an international genre now. It might not have been the case a long time ago, but to give yourself these extra skills, hopefully give you the opportunity to go and work, study, make a career in another country.
You mentioned earlier about physical health and how it's important to stay physically healthy as a person. How important is it to keep the tools that you use to play your instrument healthy as well?
Well, I think everything is connected. And I think, at least speaking personally, on behalf of several others as well, that musicians often think that their hands are the main thing, at least keyboard players. But really, it's all interconnected. The strength of your muscles, the blood flow. And that's why I say general physical health is very important as well. Now, speaking of hands, as I said, a sudden decline in my activity followed by a sudden incline last summer. Yes, it was strenuous. And I think a way of better dealing with that, looking back in retrospect, is to really do practice in gradual increments. Tendons and muscles don't like being shocked, at least that's what I found out. Take things one step at a time. So it's always a good mantra, that.
Yeah, it's a good mantra for Masons and like that. You mentioned that 2019, which was the year before the world stopped, you had between 50 and 60 concerts. How did you get those gigs, and what advice would you have on putting yourself out there as we come out of the pandemic?
I've had many lovely opportunities pre-pandemic of travelling all around the world and all around the country for concerts, which is certainly something I think I'd like to talk about, because I know that many musicians today, or I suppose since the start of the industry, have always wanted to know how on earth to get gigs. So that's something that I hold very closely. Yes, how do you find concerts? How do you get gigs? Well, it's not something that I think is really discussed enough. I think conservatoires are really doing fantastic things at the moment to bring this to the forefront. The short answer is anything but practice, because your practice is what you've got. The first step, as I said, is building your network, playing chamber music, close contact, as we said, broadening the horizon. So, for example, expanding one's network can simply be keeping in touch with the local concert organizer who gave you a gig a couple of years ago. Simple as. To keep a relationship at ground level with your local base is the key to success. Because in this industry, people know each other. Everybody knows each other across borders. The people who employ me, who give me concerts, for example, in Egypt, will know the people in Morocco and in the UK and in India. And this is, of course, why you must always be unfailingly polite. So yes, one must really focus on expanding their base, cherishing their base, contact, support network, and I think also focus on social media, online presence, email etiquette. It's a skill.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So, we are on the last section, we're on the last leg. 3 pieces of advice for fellow musicians going forward.
Well, I think the first thing is to treat music as a team job. Teamwork, I think, is another overlooked element of the profession, especially as a pianist. I'm coming from a soloist background, and I think we really underestimated how important it is to get involved in chamber music, orchestral piano, and accompaniment especially, because doing these things are going to lead you to expand your network and to get more experience. Now, the second thing is don't focus exclusively on practice, because the practice that you do, however good it is only part of the picture. The rest of it is really building your brand as a performer, deepening your own competence in other areas that are beneficial for your career. The third thing, of course, again, rather cliche, is don't forget to enjoy yourself. I think when stress comes and you have those 20 concerts in the space of a couple of months, often one forgets, and of course quite understandably, that making music is a privilege and a pleasure, not just a job. So it's about enjoying oneself as much as possible and never taking anything for granted.
It's very true. Very good pieces of advice. So thank you very much, Adam, for coming on the podcast. Thank you for your words of wisdom. It was wonderful to have you. If you want to follow Adam's career, you can follow him on Instagram at Adam Heron Piano, or you can check him out at his website, adamheron.com. And we will see you next week with another episode. Bye-bye.